In 2008 in the US, Kaylee Anthony, a sweet 2-year-old girl, suddenly disappeared without a trace. After months of searching, her remains were discovered, decomposed almost entirely, leaving only some bones and her skull. Shockingly, Kaylee's mother, Casey Anthony, continued living her life, enjoying herself as if her daughter's disappearance did not matter at all. When police began their investigation, a series of indirect pieces of evidence pointed to Casey's direct involvement in this tragic death. However, in the end, she was only convicted of providing false information. This verdict enraged the American public, who believed the justice system had failed. You are watching a true story. Let's uncover the dark secrets and thrilling details you've never heard before. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to follow today's story. Our little girl, Kaylee Anthony, was born on August 19, 2005 at a hospital in Orlando. Her mother, Casey, claimed that Kaylee was the child of an ex-boyfriend, but the father's identity remained a mystery. In fact, when Casey's ex-boyfriend heard about her giving birth, he rushed to the hospital and claimed to be Kaylee's father. However, this happiness lasted just over a month before a DNA test revealed that the man was not Kaylee's biological father. Casey quickly changed her story, asserting that Kaylee was the result of a brief relationship with another man. Unfortunately, this man had died in a car accident and was cremated, leaving the truth unverified. Kaylee was raised by her grandparents, Cindy and George Anthony, who adored her deeply and regarded her as the joy of their lives. Meanwhile, Casey, Kaylee's biological mother, remained emotionally distant. Despite being hurt by the revelation about Kaylee's parentage, Casey's ex-boyfriend still proposed to her. However, Casey declined, claiming she couldn't live a life tied down to a husband and kids. Casey soon broke up with her boyfriend and moved back in with her parents, but she did not fulfill her responsibilities as a mother. She frequently left Kaylee with her grandparents while she partied late into the night. As Kaylee grew to become the center of Cindy and George's affection, Casey started showing jealousy. She felt that her daughter had stolen the family's attention and love. This marked the beginning of tensions in the Anthony household. Casey's parents often scolded her for neglecting Kaylee, which only deepened Casey's resentment. "I'm not a failure. I have my own life," Casey shouted during a heated argument with her mother. Casey's dissatisfaction and jealousy toward her daughter grew over time. According to psychologists, this may have been the root cause of the eventual tragedy. On June 16, 2008, Kaylee had just turned 2. That evening, Casey and her mother, Cindy, had a fierce argument. Cindy demanded that Casey take responsibility for her daughter. Casey insisted that she had fulfilled her duties as a mother. After the argument, in a fit of rage, Casey took Kaylee and left the house. It was the last time her grandparents saw her alive. Over the following month, Cindy repeatedly called Casey to check on Kaylee, but Casey always had excuses, claiming she was too busy. When asked why she hadn't brought Kaylee back to visit, Casey replied, "She's with the nanny." Cindy disagreed with this arrangement, but had no way to intervene. This continued until July 15, 2008, when a sudden phone call from a towing company shattered the fragile peace. The company reported that Casey's car had been sitting in their lot for over 2 weeks and asked the family to retrieve it. However, the car didn't belong to Casey, but to Cindy. Casey had borrowed her mother's car but abandoned it at a shopping center parking lot when it ran out of gas. Cindy and George immediately went to the towing yard to investigate. As soon as they opened the car door, an overwhelming stench hit them. A yard worker nearby had to step back and cover his nose, saying, "That's the smell of a dead body." George Anthony, a former police officer, was also at the scene. After a moment of silence, he said, "That's definitely the smell of a dead body. There's no mistaking it." Cindy and George anxiously searched the car but found nothing except a bag of trash and some personal items. Fear and uncertainty engulfed them, but they couldn't draw any conclusions. That night, Cindy and George immediately went to Casey's residence to demand to see Kaylee. Casey opened the door with a nonchalant expression. When her mother pressed her with questions, she shrugged and said, "She's missing." Cindy screamed, "Missing? What? Since when?" Casey calmly replied, as if it wasn't a serious matter. 31 days. "Didn't I tell you? I left her with the nanny, but they disappeared." Cindy nearly lost her mind. "Disappeared? I'm the one who raised Kaylee, and you just let her vanish like that? Why didn't you call the police?" Casey casually responded, "It's just a nanny. If she's gone, she's gone. I didn't want to bother anyone." Enraged, Cindy immediately called the police to report Kaylee missing, ignoring Casey's pleas. "Mom, don't make a big deal out of this." When the police arrived, they demanded that Casey take them to the nanny who allegedly kidnapped Kaylee. Casey identified the nanny as Zenaida Gonzalez. Casey also claimed that she was too busy to care for her daughter because she was working at Universal Studios. However, all the information Casey provided was fabricated. When the police went to the address Casey gave them, they found an empty apartment. Zenaida Gonzalez did not exist, and Casey did not work at Universal Studios. She had lied. Additionally, Casey insisted she was employed at Universal Studios, but when the police contacted the studio for verification, it turned out to be yet another lie. This deepened the police's suspicions. Could Casey be directly involved in Kaylee's disappearance? When questioned further about Kaylee's whereabouts, Casey's attitude shifted from cooperative to cold. She bluntly stated, "I won't say anything more. I want a lawyer." This behavior only heightened the police's suspicions. Casey was arrested shortly after on 2 charges, providing false information and neglecting a child. Once Casey was in custody, the case quickly garnered media attention. Police issued alerts on major news outlets, calling on the public to provide any information about Kaylee. The story of the missing child and her enigmatic mother became the focus of nationwide intrigue. 2 days later, renowned criminal defense attorney Jose Baez approached Casey and offered to represent her for free. Baez was no stranger to high-profile cases. He had handled 45 trials, including 5 murder cases, and none of his clients had been convicted of first-degree murder. A week after taking Casey's case, Baez and his client appeared at the first hearing. This event marked the beginning of a high-stakes legal battle and further fueled public interest. During the hearing, Jose Baez, with confidence and poise, shifted the narrative away from Casey and toward the flaws in the police investigation. He argued that their initial conclusions were rushed and lacked solid evidence. The police and prosecutors remained undeterred. They presented preliminary evidence, including the smell of decomposition in Casey's car and her verifiable lies. However, the hearing took a shocking turn when photos of Casey's lifestyle after Kaylee's disappearance were revealed. These photos showed Casey dressed provocatively, dancing wildly at parties, and laughing with various men. Notably, all the photos were taken after June 16, 2008, the date Kaylee was last seen. There were no signs of a grieving mother, only a woman seemingly celebrating her newfound freedom. On July 2, 2008, just 2 weeks after Kaylee's disappearance, Casey went to a tattoo parlor and got the Italian phrase "Bella Vita," beautiful life, inked on her shoulder. Through her lawyer, Jose Baez, Casey attempted to defend herself. In an interview, Casey claimed, "I miss my daughter deeply. This pain cannot be expressed in words, but the way I cope with grief might be different." Casey further explained that partying and getting a tattoo were ways to balance her emotions and alleviate the profound sorrow she felt. However, her statements failed to quell public outrage. On November 8, 2008, hundreds of volunteers joined a large-scale search in areas where Casey might have been before Kaylee disappeared. The search focused on swamps and vacant lots near the Anthony residence. The search lasted 3 days, involving police, cadaver dogs, and even drones. Despite their best efforts, no clues about Kaylee were found. A month later, on December 11, 2008, near a small creek less than a mile from Kaylee's grandparents' house, a utility worker accidentally discovered a small skeleton and reported it to the police. Police quickly arrived and secured the area. The skeleton was found inside a trash bag, along with some children's toys, duct tape, and a small blanket. The scene also revealed that the plastic bag containing the body was left in a waterlogged swamp area, which may have slowed the rate of decomposition over time. However, this also made determining the cause of death significantly more difficult. After reconstructing the scene and the skeletal remains, forensic experts could not determine the exact time of death. However, the level of decomposition suggested that the victim had died approximately 6 months before being discovered. Investigators noticed that the victim's skull had duct tape wrapped tightly around the mouth and nose, leading them to suspect asphyxiation as the cause of death. Initial forensic analysis confirmed that the skeletal remains belonged to Kaylee Anthony, the missing 2-year-old. This identification was based on DNA samples from her teeth and skull. Alongside the body, forensic experts found small strands of hair inside the plastic bag, one of which matched Kaylee's DNA. These strands exhibited characteristics of post-mortem hair, further suggesting that the body had been hidden in a decomposed state. Additionally, chemical analysis detected traces of chloroform on the blanket and the plastic bag. Chloroform is an organic halogen compound. Inhalation in small doses can cause dizziness, drowsiness, or unconsciousness. In high doses, it can lead to nervous system damage, respiratory failure, and death. This became a critical point of evidence suggesting that the victim might have been poisoned. Investigators expanded their probe into Casey's computer search history. Phrases such as how to suffocate, chloroform, and disposing of a body were searched 84 times in the weeks leading up to Kaylee's disappearance. This behavior seemed premeditated. Typically, a person wouldn't search for such information repeatedly. Curiosity might lead to 1 or 2 searches, but not dozens. Based on this evidence, the prosecution constructed a narrative. Casey used chloroform to sedate Kaylee, then killed her by covering her mouth and nose with duct tape. The body was kept in the car trunk for several days before being discarded at the creek. Jose Bez, meanwhile, continued to deny these allegations. He argued that no direct evidence linked Casey to the crime and suggested that the media had fabricated a narrative to frame his client. This argument had some merit, as all accusations were based on circumstantial evidence, lacking any direct proof to convict Casey. During subsequent trials, the debates grew more intense when Baez criticized the utility worker who discovered Kaylee's remains, alleging that he may have moved the body closer to the Anthony residence to claim a reward from the media. Prosecutors countered, arguing that all the evidence pointed to Casey. They emphasized, "We cannot ignore her lies, her irresponsible behavior, and the undeniable traces found in her car." Casey remained silent throughout the trials. Her demeanor, at times smiling, at other times emotionless, infuriated the public. Photos of Casey partying after Kaylee's disappearance were shown in court. The prosecution questioned, "Is this how a grieving mother expresses her love for her missing daughter?" The defense argued that these photos held no legal relevance and were merely a tactic to tarnish Casey's image. Baez concluded, "No direct evidence, no murder case." The drama peaked when the duct tape on Kaylee's skull was presented as evidence. The prosecution declared, "This is a clear indication of premeditated murder." However, the defense continued to challenge the evidence collection process, suggesting flaws in identifying the traces of chloroform. The trial spanned several weeks, with numerous witnesses, forensic experts, and attorneys debating in court. The public was split into 2 factions, those demanding justice for Kaylee and those defending Casey. Ultimately, after weeks of contentious arguments, on July 5, 2011, the jury reached a decision. Casey Anthony was acquitted of first-degree murder due to insufficient direct evidence. The verdict caused an uproar in the courtroom. Kaylee's family broke down in tears while Casey breathed a sigh of relief. The nation was divided. Some condemned the judicial system, while others believed Casey was a victim of media persecution. However, Casey didn't escape completely unscathed. She was convicted on 4 counts of providing false information to the police and received a 4-year sentence. Having already served her time in jail, Casey was released just weeks after the trial. But her life would never return to normal. The public continued to monitor Casey, with many convinced she had evaded justice. Once a young mother, Casey became a symbol of controversy and outrage. Some lawyers and legal experts describe this as one of the most extraordinary cases in American judicial history where justice seemed elusive. After her release, Casey attempted to rebuild her life, but remained overshadowed by suspicion and public animosity. Kaylee's grandparents, Cindy and George Anthony, never fully recovered from the loss of their granddaughter. Their relationship with Casey was irreparably broken. The Casey Anthony case inspired numerous books, documentaries, and TV shows, all attempting to answer the question, who was truly responsible for Kaylee's death? Years later, those involved in the investigation continued to seek answers, yet the truth might remain buried forever. What do you think caused Kaylee's death? Who do you believe was responsible for her tragic fate? As for me, I firmly believe Casey must bear full responsibility, possibly stemming from her argument with her mother. Kaylee Anthony, a sweet, innocent 2-year-old, became a symbol of loss and tragedy. Candles, photos, and flowers still adorn the site where her body was found, a somber reminder of justice unfulfilled. This concludes today's video. Thank you for following this gripping story. If you found it compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more fascinating stories to come. Daniel LaPlante, a 15-year-old boy who broke into people's homes not only to steal but also to torment their families. He hid in secret spaces behind built-in wardrobes, pretending to be a ghost to monitor and scare the entire family. This behavior landed him in a juvenile detention center. However, shortly after his release, Daniel resumed his criminal activities. He brutally murdered the Gustafson family, including the pregnant young mother Priscilla, in one of the most horrifying cases in Massachusetts history. It sounds like a movie, but this is a completely true story that took place in the United States in 1986, filled with gripping and extraordinary details. Hit like and subscribe to the channel to explore this chilling tale with us now. Our protagonist, Daniel LaPlante, was born in 1970 in Townsend, Massachusetts. From a young age, he endured an incredibly difficult life. Daniel's father was the primary cause of his traumatic childhood, frequently subjecting him to physical and emotional abuse, leaving lasting scars. These experiences made it difficult for Daniel to integrate into society. He was often shunned by peers and neighbors, not only for his shabby appearance, but also for his bizarre and antisocial behavior. At North Middlesex High School, Daniel was labeled as the weird kid by his classmates. Struggling with dyslexia and constantly ridiculed, Daniel spent most of his time alone, fostering increasingly dark thoughts. Due to these psychological manifestations, Daniel LaPlante was sent to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. There, he was diagnosed with ADHD. Instead of receiving proper treatment, his condition became a psychological burden, worsening his already unstable mental state. At the same time, he faced another tragedy. The specialist entrusted with his care exploited and abused him during therapy sessions. This horrifying experience left a deep imprint on Daniel, turning him into someone who lost trust in everyone and spiraled further into isolation and antisocial behaviors. At the age of 15, Daniel began a series of thefts. Initially, he targeted valuable items like money and electronics. Over time, his motives became more bizarre. He no longer just stole items, but deliberately aimed to unsettle homeowners. Simple acts like rearranging household items or leaving objects such as dolls or reversed clocks were meant to instill an inexplicable fear in his victims. In 1986, at the age of 16, Daniel randomly chose a phone number from a public directory. Since the internet was not widespread, many private numbers were publicly listed in directories or neighborhood databases. Daniel found the number of the Bowen family, consisting of 3 members: Mr. Frank, the eldest daughter Tina, 15, and the youngest daughter Karen, 9. Under the guise of a charming young man, Daniel called Tina, introducing himself as a high-achieving, handsome athlete. Through lengthy phone conversations, Daniel gained Tina's trust. He seemed attentive and empathetic, crafting a perfect image in her eyes. Naive and curious, Tina agreed to meet him for a date. When Daniel appeared at Tina's doorstep, her expectations crumbled. Instead of the idealized young man he described, he was a scrawny, disheveled teenager. Despite this, Tina remained polite and gave Daniel a chance. During the brief date, Tina confided in Daniel about her mother's recent passing from cancer. She shared her grief, mentioning how she and her sister were trying to adapt to life with just their father. However, instead of showing typical empathy, Daniel displayed an unusual obsession with Tina's mother's death. He incessantly asked Tina about the details of her mother's death, how she looked in her final moments, how Tina felt witnessing her passing, and whether Tina ever felt her mother's presence around her. These strange questions made Tina uncomfortable, prompting her to end the date early. She resolved never to see Daniel again. But Daniel was different. He became fixated on Tina's story about her mother and her family, formulating a bizarre plan to infiltrate their lives further. After days of remote surveillance, Daniel took advantage of the Bowen family's negligence and sneaked into their home. He crawled 1.2 meters into a narrow gap between the inner and outer walls, landing in a triangular void formed by 3 walls, one of which led directly to the built-in wardrobe in Tina's bedroom. Just like in a movie, for several months, Daniel chose to live like a parasite. He ate food from the fridge, drank milk, and even used the restroom as if it were his own house. All his actions were carried out silently while the Bowen family was asleep. One evening in January 1987, while Tina and Karen were sitting in the living room, strange knocking sounds echoed through the house. These sounds weren't new to them as they had occurred before, but tonight they were unusually loud. The noises didn't just come from the walls but also from the basement below the house. Karen grabbed a small knife for protection, while Tina took a flashlight. The 2 girls cautiously descended the basement stairs. When the flashlight illuminated the wall, they were horrified to see a large message written in red liquid. "I am in your room. Come find me." Overwhelmed with fear, Tina and Karen screamed and ran out of the house. They rushed to a neighbor's house seeking help. The neighbor immediately let them in, locked the door, and called Frank to inform him about what had happened. When Frank returned home, he listened to his daughter's story. However, instead of believing them, he thought it was a prank they had orchestrated to seek attention. He assumed the messages were their doing and decided to take them to a psychologist for evaluation. Under their father's pressure, Tina and Karen reluctantly visited a psychologist. During the session, they tried to explain that the incidents weren't their doing, but the psychologist concluded that the girls were experiencing emotional distress due to their mother's death. In the following days, everything seemed to settle down. Frank felt relieved, thinking the therapy sessions had helped his daughters stabilize their emotions. However, Tina and Karen lived in constant fear, worried that something would return. A few weeks after the basement incident, strange phenomena occurred again. Late at night, Tina and Karen heard noises coming from the wall in Tina's bedroom. The sounds were persistent, as if someone was knocking to deliver a message. When the 2 girls entered the room, a horrifying sight awaited them. On the wall was a large message in red: "I am back. Find me if you can." This time, the message was even more terrifying, a direct challenge. Terrified, Tina and Karen immediately ran to the neighbor's house seeking help. They called Frank from there, begging him to come home immediately. Reluctantly, he agreed, but still believed his daughters were fabricating the events. When Frank entered the house in the dim light, he saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It wasn't just an ordinary silhouette, but a man wearing a dress, a blonde wig, and using his late wife's makeup. The figure was holding something resembling a broom, standing motionless and staring directly at him. Frank froze at the bizarre sight. After a few moments of composure, he immediately ran out, locked the door, and called the police. Within 10 minutes, the police arrived and began searching the house. However, aside from the eerie messages written in ketchup, the intruder was nowhere to be found. The intruder's disappearance was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police began to suspect Frank might have been overwhelmed and mistaken, but they continued their search. While rechecking Tina's bedroom, an officer accidentally discovered a built-in wardrobe with a small gap. Forcing the hidden door open, they uncovered a narrow, dark space inside. Inside that narrow space, Daniel LaPlante was curled up like a cornered animal. He stared back at the officers, making no attempt to escape. The police cautiously apprehended him on the spot. As Daniel was escorted out, Frank and his daughters were visibly horrified. They had never imagined that Daniel had been living within the walls of their house all this time. A thorough search of Daniel's hideout revealed a network of secret passages he had dug and expanded, connecting the rooms of the house. Small holes were meticulously drilled in various places, allowing Daniel to observe the family from any angle. These observation holes were especially concentrated in Tina and Karen's rooms. Daniel confessed that he spent hours watching the girls, even detailing their daily routines to plan his deranged, psychological pranks. Daniel used the clothes and makeup of their late mother to create the image of a ghost. He admitted that his initial purpose was to scare the girls, but his actions became increasingly obsessive, culminating in the plan to fully impersonate their mother. On the night the family fled the house, Daniel was preparing for his final act: to appear before them as their deceased mother. Frank's quick thinking and luck saved the family from a potentially deadly encounter that night. For his actions, Daniel was convicted and sent to a juvenile detention center in October 1987. However, upon his release in November of the same year, he returned to his criminal path with increasingly reckless and violent behavior. On December 1, 1987, exactly 1 month after his release, Daniel broke into the Gustafson family home, less than a kilometer from where he lived. The Gustafson family consisted of Priscilla Gustafson, 33 years old and pregnant, along with her 2 young children, Abigail, 8, and William, 5. Priscilla and her children were at home while her husband, Andrew, was at work. Armed with a stolen gun, Daniel broke into the house and began his horrific acts. When Andrew returned late in the afternoon, he found the house eerily quiet. Entering, he was horrified to discover Priscilla face down on the bed, her pillow soaked in blood, lifeless. In the bathrooms on the first and second floors, Abigail and William were found having met the same fate, drowned in the bathtubs. Andrew immediately called the police after discovering the bodies of his wife and children. The crime scene left investigators stunned by its unprecedented brutality. In the master bedroom, Priscilla was found tied to the bed, her body bloodied with fatal gunshot wounds. Signs of a desperate struggle were evident before she was killed. Abigail and William were both found dead in bathtubs. Their cause of death was determined to be drowning. Strangely, the children were killed in separate bathrooms on the first and second floors. Investigators concluded the perpetrator must have planned this thoroughly. Blood-stained fingerprints were found on several surfaces. Muddy shoe prints led from the living room to the bedrooms, and a sock near the upstairs bathtub contained a strand of Abigail's hair. The forensic evidence was immediately analyzed. The fingerprints matched Daniel LaPlante's records from his time in juvenile detention. Additionally, the shoe prints matched a pair of shoes Daniel had been known to wear, further solidifying his connection to the crime. However, there was no prior connection between him and the victims, suggesting the family may have been chosen at random. A large-scale manhunt was launched across the region. Daniel LaPlante was declared an extremely dangerous criminal. He was armed and deemed likely to violently resist if cornered. Following the Gustafson family massacre, Daniel fled Townsend. He hid in nearby small towns, continuing to live as a fugitive. During one escape attempt, Daniel broke into the home of a woman named Lynn McGovern. When discovered, he held her hostage and forced her into a car to flee. Lynn, displaying courage and quick thinking, seized an opportunity to escape from the car while Daniel was distracted. She called for help, and the police were alerted immediately. Daniel's reckless behavior not only made him the focus of the manhunt, but also spread fear throughout the community. Local newspapers plastered his image on their front pages. In December 1987, a citizen recognized Daniel from a newspaper photo and reported him to the police after spotting him hiding near a garbage dump. After 48 hours of intense pursuit, police found Daniel hiding in a trash can in the town of Ayer. In June 1988, Daniel LaPlante stood trial. Throughout the proceedings, he showed no remorse and refused to answer questions about his motives for the murders. Daniel was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, putting an end to his reign of terror. Between 1988 and 2014, Daniel repeatedly attempted to sue the legal system, claiming his rights were being violated. On one occasion, he argued that the prison system had infringed on his religious rights as a follower of Satanism. Daniel requested materials and tools to perform satanic worship rituals, but his requests were denied by the prison. In 2017, Daniel appealed for a reduced sentence, claiming he had experienced profound remorse. In court, he stated, "I am truly sorry for the harm I have caused. I seek redemption and the chance to regain my humanity." However, psychological experts present at the hearing confirmed that Daniel showed no genuine empathy. They believed his apology was a manipulative ploy to gain freedom. The court rejected Daniel's appeal. The final ruling ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison without any possibility of parole. The public overwhelmingly supported the decision. Many believed Daniel LaPlante was beyond rehabilitation, and his permanent incarceration was the only way to guarantee public safety. Daniel's case became a symbol of the devastating consequences of abuse and the horrors it can unleash. His tragic past did not excuse the heinous acts he committed. The victims' families continued to live with the pain of their loss. They held annual memorials to honor those they had lost while raising awareness about the dangers posed by individuals with severe psychological disorders. This concludes the video. Thank you for following this gripping story. If you found this video compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to catch more intriguing stories.
In 2009, in Texas, USA, a young mother named Otty Sanchez committed the horrific act of killing her own newborn child. The scene discovered by police in Sanchez's apartment was straight out of a horror movie. Her 3-week-old baby had been dismembered, its face skinned, and parts of its body eaten. The baby's mother was sitting on the couch, screaming repeatedly that she had killed her child. How could a mother commit such a barbaric act? What lies behind this story? Psychological pressure, loneliness, or the whispers of the devil? This case is not only terrifying, but also raises profound questions about mental health, the responsibilities of family and society in protecting vulnerable individuals. This video will unveil dark secrets and heartbreaking stories you've never heard before. Hit like and subscribe to join us as we uncover this mystery together. The setting: San Antonio, Texas, USA. A city celebrated for its natural beauty intertwined with the modernity of a rapidly growing urban landscape. As a cultural and historical hub, San Antonio boasts landmarks like the Alamo and Riverwalk, attracting millions of tourists annually. However, beneath this peaceful exterior, San Antonio has witnessed its share of dark moments, where tragedies unfold even in seemingly safest neighborhoods. On July 26, 2009, the San Antonio police received an urgent call from an elderly woman reporting horrifying screams coming from a nearby apartment. Initially, the police were unclear about the situation, but when the woman called a second time, just minutes later, the severity of the matter became evident. Police rushed to the address provided by the woman. They knocked on the door, but received no response, except for loud screams emanating from inside. Concerned for the safety of those inside, they decided to break down the door. What they saw inside left the officers utterly speechless. On the floor lay the lifeless body of a newborn baby in a pool of blood, severely mutilated. The baby's arms and legs were severed, with jagged cuts suggesting a sharp instrument. The child's face was entirely skinned, exposing raw red muscle. The head was mangled and part of the brain was missing, leaving a horrifying hollow wound. Scattered around the body were fragments of tiny bones mixed with blood and tissue, creating a haunting scene that defied description. On a nearby couch sat a middle-aged woman in a state of shock, covered in blood from head to toe, with her hands visibly smeared with gore. She clutched a knife and kept murmuring, "I killed my baby." The woman, later identified as Otty Sanchez, had severe injuries to her throat, appearing to have attempted suicide. The police immediately disarmed the woman and called for medical assistance. While waiting for the ambulance, they attempted to gather information, but she only mumbled about voices and the devil forcing her to do it. At this point, the elderly woman who had called the police, Gloria Sanchez, confirmed that the injured woman was her niece, Otty Sanchez, a 33-year-old and the apartment's resident. Gloria, who lived nearby, explained that she had heard unusual screams from the apartment earlier that day and decided to alert the authorities. At the scene, police found significant evidence: a blood-stained knife, a sword, a hammer, and several baby items such as clothes and blankets, all soaked in blood. During a thorough search of the apartment, they also discovered two other children, Otty's nieces, aged 5 and 7, playing outside. Fortunately, neither was present during the incident. The baby's identity was quickly confirmed through records and Gloria's statements. The victim was Scott Sanchez Jr., Otty Sanchez's biological son, only 3 weeks old. The infant was the sole victim of this horrific crime. Meanwhile, police transported Otty Sanchez to the hospital to treat her severe neck wounds. Once stabilized, she began confessing to her crime. In a chilling account, she stated that voices in her head had compelled her to kill her son and commit unimaginable acts. Otty admitted to dismembering baby Scott Jr. with a knife, tearing into his skull, and consuming part of his brain. She justified these heinous acts by claiming they were demands from the devil. This horrifying truth is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine, but rest assured, it's all disturbingly real. Otty Sanchez was born in 1976 in a small town in southern Texas, USA. As the youngest child in a poor, working-class family, Otty constantly struggled with both material and emotional deprivation. Otty's childhood became even darker when her parents divorced when she was only 7 years old. Her father left the family, and her mother fell into unemployment, plunging the family into debt. Otty grew up in an unstable environment marked by endless arguments between her mother and her siblings. At the age of 10, Otty began showing signs of psychological instability. She often spoke to invisible friends and became fearful when left alone. At school, Otty was not sociable and was frequently bullied by her peers for her odd behavior. She often wore headphones to avoid interacting with others. During her teenage years, Otty began escaping reality by immersing herself in music. She developed a strong passion for melancholic tunes and often wrote in her diary about strange dreams where she was surrounded by whispering shadows. In 2006, Otty met Scott W. Buchhold, a freelance musician known for his charming appearance and confident demeanor. Otty was quickly drawn to Scott, whom she saw as a beacon of light in her dark life. They started dating, and after just a few months, the two decided to get married. Their married life was initially filled with joy, but cracks soon began to appear. Scott frequently traveled for performances, leaving Otty alone. During this time, she began feeling lonely and restless, leading her to suspect her husband of infidelity. In 2008, Otty became pregnant with their first child, which seemed to bring hope to their small family. However, during her pregnancy, Otty gradually fell into anxiety and paranoia. She often woke up in the middle of the night, claiming to hear the cries of a baby, even though her child was still in her womb. In June 2009, Otty gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Scott Sanchez Jr. Shortly after delivery, she developed an infection and had to stay in the hospital for nearly a week for treatment. This painful experience caused her extreme stress. Doctors diagnosed her with postpartum depression and prescribed antidepressants. Upon returning home, Otty began displaying increasingly strange behavior. She refused to hold her baby, claiming that the child didn't belong to her. At times, Otty would stare at her son for hours without blinking, a behavior typical of those experiencing psychosis. A week before the incident, Otty took her son to visit Scott's parents. There, Scott asked her for the child's birth certificate to complete some paperwork, but Otty reacted violently, accusing Scott of trying to take her child away. After a major argument, Otty drove away angrily with her son, leaving behind all her documents, wallet, and antidepressants. On July 20, 2009, Scott called the police to report Otty's erratic behavior. He feared she might harm herself or the baby. However, no action was taken, as the police considered it a typical family dispute. In the days that followed, Otty completely cut off contact with Scott's family. Neighbors reported seeing her pacing around her house at night, muttering to herself and laughing loudly for no apparent reason. On one occasion, she screamed that a dark entity was following her, and the scream was so loud that many people in the vicinity heard it. The night before the incident, a neighbor also heard Otty screaming inside her house, but dismissed it as another one of her usual panic attacks and paid little attention. Police expanded their investigation, focusing on Otty Sanchez's relatives and friends to uncover the reasons behind her actions. Otty's aunt, who reported the crime, was still in shock and couldn't believe what had happened. She recounted, "I live in a nearby house, but knew nothing until it was too late. If I had known, I would have tried to stop it." Gloria further revealed that Otty had been diagnosed with mental illness years ago. However, the family rarely discussed it out of fear of societal judgment. She also didn't know which hospital Otty had been treated at, but mentioned that the hospital had called a few months prior, asking her to come in for a checkup. Otty used to say that she heard voices in her head. They never stopped and always whispered terrible things. "I think those voices controlled her actions," Gloria said, her voice trembling. A few days before the incident, Otty stopped eating and often cried alone. "I don't think my niece was aware of what she was doing. She's a mental health patient, and her actions were not deliberate." When asked about Otty's family circumstances, Gloria admitted that the child's death was not only due to mental illness, but also deep emotional trauma. Her husband abandoned her just days before this happened. "I believe that completely broke her." Meanwhile, Scott W. Buchhold, Otty's ex-husband and the victim's father, was also questioned by police. Scott admitted that he had once loved Otty and believed she would be a good mother. However, after the baby was born, Otty became unpredictable and displayed unusual behavior. When asked about his feelings after his child's death, Scott tearfully said, "She used to be a sweet woman, someone I loved, but what she did is unforgivable. I think she must pay for her cruel actions. She needs to be executed." Testimonies from Scott and Gloria helped police create a clearer picture of Otty's mental state before the tragedy occurred. Using these clues, the police decided to search Otty's medical records to better understand her condition, hoping to find a clearer explanation for her horrifying actions. At the psychiatric ward of San Antonio Central Hospital, they discovered Otty's medical records. She had been prescribed citalopram, a common antidepressant. Reports showed that Otty had only started taking citalopram a day before committing the crime. Medical experts noted that antidepressants usually take weeks to take effect, ruling out the possibility that the drug caused immediate psychosis. However, the medical records also revealed that Otty Sanchez had a history of paranoid psychosis. Doctors had previously recorded that she often heard strange voices inside her head. These voices not only disturbed her but also incited her to engage in dangerous actions. Weeks before the incident, Otty told her doctor that the voices were becoming more frequent and terrifying. She described them as screaming, urging her to commit horrifying acts. Psychologists later analyzed that, besides psychosis, Otty's agitated emotional state played a significant role. She had just experienced a major emotional shock when her husband, Scott W. Buchholz, abandoned her only days after she gave birth. Scott's abandonment came at a time when Otty needed support the most, leaving her feeling lonely and betrayed. This event not only increased her stress levels but also pushed her into a severe state of instability where she could no longer distinguish reality from hallucinations. Otty's statements after her arrest further reinforced this conclusion. She repeatedly mentioned being urged by the voices. She said that the voices continuously threatened her, forcing her to kill her son to protect herself. "I didn't want to do it," Otty tearfully said, "but I couldn't stop. The voices said if I didn't kill him, they would kill me." Psychologists determined that in Otty's mind, these voices had become her reality. She completely believed she had no choice but to carry out their commands. Experts concluded that the primary cause of the crime was a combination of paranoid psychosis and severe psychological agitation caused by her ex-husband's abandonment and postpartum stress. After the case shocked the public, Otty Sanchez's trial officially began in 2010. It was not only a trial to determine her guilt, but also a test of how society addresses mental health issues. The trial lasted over a year, with dozens of hearings and heated debates between the prosecution and the defense attorneys. Both sides worked tirelessly to present evidence supporting their arguments. Prosecutors described Otty's crime as unforgivable and emphasized the brutality of the case. They called for a life sentence or even the death penalty to set an example for similar crimes. The defense attorneys argued that Otty was completely unaware of her actions at the time of the crime. They claimed she was controlled by the voices in her head, a clear symptom of paranoid psychosis. Additionally, 3 independent evaluations were conducted by leading experts in psychology and psychiatry. The assessments concluded that Otty Sanchez suffered from severe schizophrenia and was significantly affected by delusions. They affirmed that she was unable to distinguish right from wrong or control her actions at the time of the crime. After months of debate, the judge delivered the final decision. Otty Sanchez was not sentenced to prison or the death penalty, but was instead committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. Instead of punishment, Otty required long-term treatment to ensure she was no longer a threat to the community or herself. Otty would only be allowed to return to society after undergoing strict medical evaluations and being confirmed as fully recovered. This was intended to protect both her and the community. Some supported this decision, calling it a humane way to handle individuals with severe mental illness. However, many others, including Otty's ex-husband, Scott Buchholz, strongly opposed it, demanding she face the death penalty. Scott declared to the media, "She may be ill, but that doesn't change the fact that my son died a cruel death. Justice must be served." In the days following the verdict, protests took place outside the courthouse. Some mental health advocacy groups called for society to approach this issue with more empathy and understanding. At the psychiatric facility, Otty began receiving intensive treatment. Doctors closely monitored her condition and implemented psychological therapies to reduce her delusions. However, her reintegration into society likely remains a distant prospect. Otty Sanchez's case became a classic example of how to handle mentally ill offenders, raising significant questions about society's responsibility to support individuals at high risk of endangering the community. This concludes the video. Thank you for following this gripping story. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with more fascinating stories.